Hello and welcome to Context. I'm Enrico Woolford. Thank you so much for joining us on Context on NCN today. And here's why we are on Context today, because we've got a special guest with us, Gabriel Christian. Mr. Christian, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Woolford. It's an honor to be here in Guyana and with you on your program.
And Context is a program on which we do exactly what the name suggests, put things in context. You'll probably be listed as an attorney at law, but that's not why you're really here. You are a guest of the International Decade of People of African Descent, the Guyana Assembly, IPADG, and IPADG is doing quite a lot of work to explain to the Guyanese people what is the importance of this decade. But you've been in Guyana before. Explain your history and your connection to Guyana.
Well, I've been in Guyana before spiritually, not physically. My roots in Guyana are deep, but this trip is my first trip to Guyana, our beloved second home in many respects. I'm here today in my shirt jack. I noticed you in your suit. You don't have your tie, so I'll give you a little break on that. But in 1972, when I attended the Dominica Grammar School, which would be Dominica's equivalent of QC, in each of the islands, each of the former British colonies, the British had these elite schools. In Trinidad, Queen's Royal College, St. Mary's. In Jamaica, Jamaica College, Kingston College, Walmers. In Barbados, Harrison College, Lord School, Combermere. In Dominica, the Dominica Grammar School. They wore woolen blazers, white shirts, woolen ties, like the old British public schools. But in '72, when I started at the grammar school, they moved from that to the shirt jack because our premier, Edward Oliver LeBlanc, was a Pan-Africanist. He was a nationalist. He believed in Caribbean integration, and he was very close to Lyndon Forbes Burnham, who also, I was told, on occasion, wore a shirt jack. So in honor of that legacy of my generation, which was a generation that was immersed in that quest for identity, understanding our African roots that had been robbed from us, understanding how our economies had been crafted as simply appendages of the metropolitan center. How do we craft a nation? How do we do nation building? That was my time. That was my generation. And so at the same time we started with the shirt jack, we also saw a transition from strictly Shakespeare and Keats and Shelley and Milton to Jan Carew. Jan Carew's Black Midas was required reading in my first form class. So while I may not have been in Guyana, on a physical plane, on a spiritual/mental plane, I knew of Mahaika, Batika, the Rupununi, the Corentyne, the Essequibo, and the pork knockers in the interior mining coal. And the protagonist, I think, in that story was Shark. We also had Martin Carter, who was a poet. They came for me in the morning, I believe. Edgar Mittelholzer, Children of Guyana. So we were immersed in that flowering of Caribbean nationalism and national pride. That was the context, to use the name of your program, within which I grew. And of course, Walter Rodney, how Europe developed Africa was required reading among the radical intelligentsia of my time.
Now, politically, did you also include the Western Trial by Dr. Jagan and all the other political Destiny to Mold by Forbes Burnham and so on?
Well, I can tell you, we knew of Dr. Jagan, of course. Who could not know of Dr. Jagan? And certainly Burnham. But those books were not used in our schools, but we would read the speeches, we'd read the newspaper articles. I never got to meet Forbes Burnham, but I got to meet his grandson, Kitindi Charles, the son of Van Charles. He worked at our law firm for some time. He's now a lawyer in Canada, doing quite well. But I met Dr. Jagan at the first festival of the Grenada Revolution when I was 19, and we attended a day-long conference on Caribbean nationalism and the way forward and so on and so forth. Yeah, and so when I stepped in what was then Atkinson Field, the U.S. Army Air Corps field, of which there were 8 during World War II. When my father served in World War II, I saw that it was no longer Atkinson Field or Timeri, but Dr. Cheji Jagan International Airport. I think he made a worthy contribution. Of course, you know, I will say both Jagan and Forbes Burnham were nation builders, in this country. And of course, you know, they made their contributions, they had their merits, and of course their demerits. But so all of us can be said to have negatives and positives to our character and to our line of march.
Based on your history and, as you said, your spiritual connection to Guyana, I would call it also a political connection,
yes, of
to
course,
Guyana. How do you think young people in particular in Guyana and in the Caribbean should look at history and see where we've come from and where we ought to be? Because so often we tend to look at the now rather than to...
not just the now. I was born in Dominica. I'm proud of my Dominican heritage. I'm proud of my Caribbean heritage, of which Guyana is part. Guyana is an inextricable part of my childhood and my heritage. I was telling someone coming in here, before I get back, I need to go to a pharmacy to get me some ferrol compound and some limacol. I think, what do you call it, the feeling of a breeze in a bottle or something like that?
Freshness
the
of a
freshness of a breeze in a bottle. Those were the staples in our household growing up. History is a guide to our future. Right now, Guyana is struck oil. A very good friend of mine, Indian friend, physicist, Dr. Satyam Puradashi, is the director of big data at Halliburton. As we move into artificial intelligence as a concept is meaningless without big data. What they do on an almost DNA level is study behavior, processes, and from that, artificial intelligence evolves. So too, if we're to have nation building worthy of the name, one has to have a keen grasp of one's history. You go to the United Kingdom, you go to the United States, you see the museums, the think tanks, the monuments to their greats. We too need to be able, as Dominicans, Guyanese, West Indians, to go to a bookstore and find 1, 2, 3 biographies, maybe from different perspectives, on Lyndon Forbes Burnham. 1, 2, 3 biographies on Chetty Jagan from different perspectives. A woman might write from one perspective, someone who takes a different political view from another. That kind of probing of our past is really the hallmark of a purposeful and serious people. And so for the young people, I say, let's use the smartphone smartly. I spoke at a Tuskegee Airmen event at Andrews Air Force Base not long ago, and I said to them that when I was growing up, if you wanted to take pictures, you had to get a camera. If you wanted to take a movie, you had to get a movie camera. If you wanted a radio, you had to do a radio and so on. If you wanted to play a record, you had to get a record player. If you wanted to read a book, you had to buy one or go to the library. Today, all of that and more is on one device. We can take it to bed with us. We can take it to other places with us. Let's use smartphones not simply for social media and passing off jokes, but let's use it to do the sort of research, the sort of probing of our condition. You can write. We need to do more writing. We need to do more research and development. We need to have a certain mastery in way of understanding our past as a way to guide us to a better future dispensation. That I do believe is very important. And that is why education is part of the PAGI mission, the mission of educating Guyanese of African descent is important, so that our Amerindian brothers and sisters, or East Indian brothers and sisters, because that's what they are, or Portuguese or European brothers and sisters, can see how important each segment of Guyanese society is, so that we can then be bound in that inextricably, tightly wound cord of destiny, working together for a better future.
I'm speaking with Gabriel Christian. He is an attorney at law. He's a guest of the International Decade of People of African Descent, Guyana Assembly. And we're talking about that decade and what the decade means to all of us as Guyanese and people from the Caribbean, and how all of that fits in to what contribution we could make in terms of national development in each of our areas. You know, you were also in Guyana at a time of the 50th anniversary of our Republican status. You spoke about the need for us to have records and to be educated. You've done quite a few books, at least 2 you've got with us here.
You want me to talk about this one that you
Before you start to talk about this one, let's link the 50th anniversary of Republican status, because when the era from which you're talking was both the British Caribbean.
British West Indies.
And
we didn't use the word Caribbean in those days.
Yes,
We were the West Indies cricket team, and we used British West Indies, BWI. So my father was in the British Army, and there was the BWIR, that's the British West Indian Regiment, which, by the way, was the oldest non-white regiment in British military history. Not many people know that. And I've been there for almost 200 years. Fought wars of colonial conquest, using colonized people to fight other colonized people. But that's another story. But I think Guyana's 50th anniversary as a republic is important, because Dominica is the only former British West Indian island that went into independence as a republic. There are those like
lots of people don't realize that.
The only one. Trinidad started as a monarchy, Guyana started as a monarchy, and then went on to republican status. Dominica's leadership at the time was strongly influenced. I would say Dominica was the closest country to Guyana, because the premier then, Patrick John, was very close to Forbes Burnham. And Guyana also, Dominica bears a lot of similarities. Lots of rivers, not as big as the Essequibo, of course. Lots of mountains, very green. The greenest island in the Caribbean. And the government at the time, the Dominica Labour Party, was talking about new socialism and cooperatives and so on. And actually, there was an alliance proposed between Dominica and Guyana. And Eugenia Charles's party then in the opposition, someone was heard to say, well, we don't want to have an alliance with Guyana, because if we have an alliance with Guyana, there'll very soon be jaguar rocking around in the streets of Roseau, and tigers too. But that was just political humbug. But there's a very close relationship. And I want to say another thing as well. My oldest brother was the first Dominican to become a veterinary surgeon. He actually was in the same class with the current General Secretary of CARICOM, Erwin LaRocque. And he got a scholarship in 1975 from Indira Gandhi's government and studied in southern India for 5 years. He got his doctor of veterinary medicine in India, and then went on to the University of Florida to do his master's. But he would come to Guyana almost every year on animal health conferences, a place, I think it's a project called Ripaha.
Yes.
And he would stay at the Pegasus. Is it Pegasus?
Pegasus.
And the last time he came back from Guyana, I was teaching then agricultural science at my old grammar school, that interim period after sixth form, when I did sixth form Cambridge, to go on to higher education at university level. And they brought me a shirt made in Guyana. That shirt, Brother Woolford, was a shirt, it was my best shirt. It was a shirt that I went to the United States with almost 40 years ago. And it was made of material all locally produced in Guyana, and the buttons were made of coconut shell. I'd never before seen a shirt with coconut shell buttons in my life. But it was a beautiful shirt. And so 2 years ago, the Caribbean Business Alliance that was co-founded with myself, Royston de Souza from New Amsterdam, who is the owner of Caribbean Cargo, Ansel Hall from Trinidad, Gabriel Christian Dominica, and Cecil Lockhart Dominica. We invited Ms. Granger to the University of Maryland Conference Center to give a speech to the Caribbean nationals, Guyanese nationals, and I introduced her. I had the same shirt, my shirt jack. Royston had his suit and tie. I said, Royston, you're letting down the side, man. Come on. Anyway, when I introduced her, I remarked to her that I came to the United States to go to college with a Guyanese-made shirt. And when she came to the podium, she thanked me for my very nice introduction and said, Christian, I regret to advise you that all these factories have been closed. They are no more. And so now with Guyana's newly found wealth, we have to engage again the mission of creating local industry. It's no good having mineral wealth or oil wealth or wealth of any kind if all your foreign exchange is going to be frittered away by imports. Guyana has the land. Guyana is possessed of a humankind from diverse strands, possessed of superior intelligence. I worked in the defense industry. The only person of color other than myself in a particular department, which was electronic warfare, was an Indo-Afro-Guyanese. and how proud I was to see a West Indian in that position, one of us. So if Guyana is to prosper, it must make sure that we begin to have a textile industry, to have a fashion industry based on those textiles, to create that development dynamic in agriculture, in leather goods, in food products of diverse kind. My brother brought back something also called carambola. It was part of the whole effort to then replace, I think, raisins and other things like prunes with local products. Those are good ideas. And I would like to see that Guyana begin to engage the development of that indigenous food and textile and other related industries.
One of the challenges of development is information comes from all sides, and people believe what they want to believe. And the other challenge to industrialization, of course, is fuel, is to make sure that you can do it at a cheaper cost than.
You need to make sure you have a comparative advantage.
So therefore, how do you take advantage of the flow of information that something made by Gucci in some other part of the world is better than what you can produce, and the fact that you need to produce, as you said, at a comparative advantage?
Brother Woolford, you made an outstanding point. Colonialism...
Don't I usually?
Of course.
Go ahead.
Colonialism was not simply a political and economic system. It was a way of thinking. I was brought up in a quintessentially British home. My father's hero was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a British nationalist. I have no problem with that. He was British. He had a right to be a British nationalist. What does that have to do with me if it's to my disadvantage? I want to make sure that every Guyanese, every Dominican, every West Indian has the same pride in heritage as the British people of whom we were part in way of political connection, in way of colonial domination, had. In fact, I say we ought to study the British because they gave us a lot of our institutions. We need to understand their engagement with commercial botany. How much time do we have spent each year in our islands, in Guyana, focused on commercial botany? How the British used Kew Gardens in London and set up across the Caribbean, in Dominica, in Guyana, in St. Vincent, gardens, where they would bring plants from all over the empire to see what would thrive and what would survive, and then see what could be commercialized to benefit London. Have we taken time to study that? The British sent Captain Bligh all the way to the South Sea Islands, because in the days of sail, when the lack of wind could beguile a ship, and the ship would be there sitting, and people are waiting on the wheat flour from England, folks could starve. So they wanted to get something that could be used in, let's say, as a substitute for wheat or corn. Breadfruit was then identified as exactly that product. And they sent Bligh, and of course, the guys fell in love with the girls, and there was a mutiny on the Bounty. They cast Bligh away on a ship. Master mariner that he was, he survived, navigated 3,000 miles, and came back and got the breadfruit and brought it to St. Vincent, and it proliferated across the Caribbean. And today, breadfruit, I was at Channel 9 last night, and I walked in on the counter of the TV station. Was a nice, green, plump breadfruit. I had not seen one in years, all because of commercial botany and the organization of botanic science by the British. That's a legacy institution, and that's a legacy process of understanding botany and botanic science that we need to continue to develop and shape to our own ends. Similarly then, with rule of law, with different processes, with that British penchant for the written word and heritage, we need to have the museums. I, as a child, would hear about BG, British Guyana, and the Troubles in the 1960s. Where can